About 2 weeks ago, my co-founder, Mike Julian, who's the other half of Duckbill, which, for those who are blessedly unaware, is the company that pays me to have opinions about cloud bills, went looking on the Anthropic dashboard for a number you would reasonably expect to exist. How much is each person on our team spending on Claude Code? Not what are we spending in total, that's an invoice, or what's our usage, but the basic per seat cost by user view that exists on literally every other piece of SaaS we have ever procured. And he couldn't find it. So what do you do in that situation? That's right. You put aside your characteristic dignity and you ask on X, the everything app, what happens? And then you have a loud jackass of a business partner who will quote tweet you on this thing. The same question, same lack of dignity, just more emphatic, because the thing about working at a company that exists to make sense of opaque cloud billing is that you develop a finely tuned sense for, wait a second, is this the same problem we charge other people to solve, but now us as the customer? Because if so, that is some bullshit. Now, someone from Anthropic responded, and this isn't about the engineer in question. There's a name attached to the tweet, and she works in customer-facing engineering at Anthropic, and she gave the customer service-approved answer that her org has set her up to give. We're not going to talk about her, because the answer that her company put in her mouth is the thing that I want to look at. There is no per-user cost view. Plans are flat and they cost per seat. If you want cost estimates per user, you can, and I want everyone in this room right now to feel the weight of this phrase here, hook up OTel. The answer to a billing question is to get the OpenTelemetry SDK, wire up a collector, pipe the metrics into a backend, build the dashboard you wish we had. But I don't want to understate just how bullshit this is from a customer experience perspective either. When a customer asks a vendor a basic question, and the vendor's answer is wire up the SDK, do the collector dance, and all the rest, the vendor has, with perfect technical correctness, told the customer to go fuck themselves. And we're all about to be Bob, because we are all about to wire up a shit ton of OTel. The rest of this talk is about what happens after you wire up that OTel, because somebody is going to read all that telemetry, and it's not going to be you. It's sure as shit not going to be me, so please don't even ask. That is the talk. The 3 pillars of observability, traces, and 2 things my agents do not give a shit about because neither Honey Badger nor Claude give a shit. I'm not going to give you an agenda for this. I'm just going to give you a question, which is this. What does observability look like when the primary reader of your telemetry isn't a person anymore? The rest of this talk is my attempt at an answer. I'm Corey Quinn. I've spent 10 years now staring into the abyss of cloud bills and being paid to have opinions about those things. That is somehow a real job. I'm still not clear how. I write the Last Week in AWS newsletter, the artificialconfidence.com recently launched one, and I'm the chief cloud economist at Duckbill. At no point in setting all of this up over the previous 10 years, would I have predicted that one of the more embarrassing professional admissions I would ever make on a stage is that I have a Honeycomb account. A personal one. The kind you have to apologize for. But I do. And the people who run Honeycomb upgraded my Honeycomb personal shitposting account to enterprise on a Zoom call that, out of what I can only assume was morbid curiosity mixed with pity. And it is here, as they say, that their troubles began. Now, I have to begin with the observation that the 3 pillars of observability are a lie, because if I don't say that, then Charity Majors is going to throw a shoe at me, possibly with part of someone's leg still attached. But speaking of charity, I also want to pass the mic for a second over to my mascot, Billy the Platypus. Now we're on the same visual page for the rest of the presentation. Welcome to the rest of it. The 3 pillars of observability are a lie. Not because they're wrong, but because the world has changed again. And 2 of these pillars are about to have a fairly bad day. Metrics, logs, and traces are the textbook answer that every observability monitoring vendor has on their marketing page. It is every conference talk you have ever sat through, every onboarding deck for a junior engineer who had the misfortune to join an SRE team somewhere. There are 3 pillars, and if you stand them up, you have observability, which is just another term for hipster monitoring. Roll the credits, open the bar. This has been the largely general consensus for about a decade. It is also my position that this is a description of a world that is no longer the world in which we are operating. So here's the truth that nobody in observability marketing really wants to say on a slide, so I'm going to go and say it for them. We start with metrics, which is for the human who already knows what's wrong through a vague sense, has the dashboard URL saved to bookmarks, they have typed the query before, and is now staring at one very specific line, praying it goes back down before stand-up. Then you have logs, which is for the human who has tried everything, given up on most of it, and is now desperately grepping at 3 o'clock in the morning with fuzzy tab completion enabled because they don't remember what service they're even in anymore. May God have mercy on them. And then you have traces for the human who has been backed into a corner under a deadline with a rabid, foaming boss snapping at their heels and a Slack channel completely full of customers asking why nothing works, and who has finally accepted that, yeah, they're going to have to read the actual story of what a request did now, one span at a time, while the rest of the room burns. And all 3 of these were designed for the same reader, a person with eyes and intuition, presumably the ability to skim or read, and critically, with limited time, which means the visualization matters as much as the data, and now that reader has been replaced. Their seat is empty, but the dashboards are still there, the graphs are still moving, the alerts are still firing, where? Into the void. And what is increasingly reading that telemetry is now a process. It doesn't have eyes, it can't skim, it can't tell at a glance that the orange line going up is bad and the green line going down is good. It does not understand your color scheme. It cannot recognize the dashboard you cleverly built that arranges 6 panels in a way that tells a story just so to a senior engineer. But it can read attributes. It can follow trace IDs, and it can grep very quickly across an enormous amount of structured data. That is the profile of a reader, but it is not the reader we built these tools for. Now, before I tell you what you should do about this, I'm instead going to tell you what I did, which was wrong in interesting ways. For most of the last year, my debugging workflow looked a lot like this. I had Claude. I gave it tools. I told it when something breaks, go figure out what broke. And the first thing it would do is it would run kubectl logs. And then that didn't work because, why would it? It would then check CloudWatch. And when that didn't help, because the CloudWatch team has an internal guiding North Star of never being helpful at all if it can possibly avoid it, it would, for reasons neither of us could defend, check local Docker logs on the machine it was running on rather than where the application was running. It was like watching someone search behind couch cushions for their car keys when they do not, in fact, own a couch. It was really something. You can work super hard at it, but you're not going to get anywhere. It's like speed racing some rocking chairs. Kubectl logs is useful when you know which pod it's on. It's useful when the pod still exists, fortunately, and it's useful when the failure was recent enough that the logs haven't rolled over. Those are 3 preconditions that are routinely not met. CloudWatch logs, which is where good ideas go to be billed at 50 cents per gigabyte ingested, and where you can't meaningfully query across more than one log group without writing a logs insights query in a syntax that I'm pretty sure was designed by someone who lost a bet. And local Docker logs on machines that don't exist in the context of the application that just broke just rounds that out for completeness, because that's where the agent would go when the first 2 didn't pan out. Looking for log files on a node that had been replaced by the autoscaler an hour earlier in some cases. There's nothing there, and there was never going to be anything there, but it would keep trying. This is exactly the kind of dead-end loop that makes just hook up OTel sound, to the person on the receiving end of it, indistinguishable from go fuck yourself. If your agent can't see anything and you keep telling it to look in places that don't exist, so it does something. If your vendor's answer, similarly to a billing question, is instrument it yourself, you keep wiring up infrastructure to answer questions that you weren't supposed to have asked in the first place, when what you really should have done is wired up that vendor's rep to a car battery instead. It's the same shape, it is the same in dignity. That was the agent reading the wrong data. Another failure mode that I lived through was when the data that mattered wasn't what was being captured at all. This is once again Billy the Platypus. He is my mascot, but he is also, not kidding, a service. And this is exactly his personality. His job is to read emails in my inbox from strangers and respond in the spirit of that tagline. HR would describe his tone as an opportunity for growth. For fun, because I don't know where the line is, he will also search your email address using data enrichment APIs to figure out what you look like, and then craft a cartoon of him dunking on you in some way. And the way that I found out that it wasn't working is that my email responses started getting nicer. My outage signal became politeness. There was no pager duty alert, there was no Slack ping, and nothing turning red. Just the quiet, ominous absence of cruelty from a cartoon animal, which I only noticed 3 days later when someone that I respect emails me to ask why I've seemed shockingly polite in my correspondence lately and is everything okay. An inbox at peace is, for me at least, the strongest possible outage signal, and it's not a signal, as it turns out, that any observability tool has ever been set up to detect before. The tools were not broken, but they were aimed at me, a human who could not be bothered to instrument them properly or to look at them. So I stopped being the user, and here is what that looked like in practice. There is a Kubernetes cluster in my sewing room. We do not sew. The cluster is named after the room that it lives in, which I have since learned is not a thing you're supposed to name a cluster after, but I named it before I instrumented it, and now renaming it would break one of these dashboards that I might want to look at someday. It's called Sewing Room now, and we're all living with the consequences of that decision. It's just like production. This cluster, plus a fleet of AWS Lambda functions, plus an isolated AWS account that I call Superfund because it is both toxic and expensive, along with a couple of Vercel things, are what that infrastructure runs. And it is entirely managed by Claude. I have not written a single line of Terraform for any of this. I have only described what I wanted to a robot and then corrected the resulting damage by what some would call prompt engineering, but in reality, it's just me begging the robot, alternating with threats when it doesn't go well. And I instrumented all of this with Claude, Honeycomb, and a tremendous amount of brute force. There are currently 16 data sets in my Honeycomb account, and each one of them is a service that Claude built and operates with a little bit of adult supervision from me at the cardinal points so that human in the loop doesn't become human in the noose. The service named Dunkbot 9000, for example, is real, and yes, it has a version number, and yes, that's funny, only to the point where it breaks at 3 o'clock in the morning and I somehow get an alert at it. The reason that this slide is here and the reason that it matters is that I want you to internalize the shape of what I'm describing here, because this is not a hypothetical, imagine if your code was written and instrumented by AI that I came up with for a conference slide deck. This is a snapshot of my Honeycomb account from yesterday when I finalized writing the slides, because I am both very good in a crisis and also only good in a crisis. That's procrastination in a nutshell. So the code is written, the services are running, and the telemetry has been flowing for a while now. And the only reader that looks at it most of the time is also Claude. The first thing I learned when the Honeycomb team came in to look at my account in a session that I think was internally billed as well-meaning cleanup was this number, 9,176, which is the number of times a Kubernetes liveness probe fired into the telemetry pipeline in a 24-hour period. Every 9 seconds, a little request goes out and says, "Are you alive?" And the service says, "I am alive," and a span is generated, and a row is written, and 3 cents disappear off someone's budget somewhere, and somewhere a load balancer gets to feel seen again. I was paying Honeycomb to ingest the world's most boring conversation between a cluster and itself. The signal-to-noise ratio of my observability in this environment was the signal-to-noise ratio of a stadium where everyone's got hiccups. It was great. Now here's the thing. The traditional cardinality story, keep your high cardinality fields under control, watch your unique value counts, don't blow up your indices, was a story that we told ourselves because dashboards have screens, and screens have pixels, and a graph with 10,000 unique series on it is unreadable to a person, and why we'll put Steven on a pip. That is a constraint we invented for a human reader. An agent does not care if there are 10,000 unique series. An agent doesn't look at a graph. It reads the underlying spans. The cardinality of a field, let's say the email sender domain on every Billy process, was previously a thing that I would have suppressed because a chart broken down by sender domain is useless. But now when Claude's trying to figure out why a specific person's emails are failing to be sarcastic and shitty, that field is now the single most useful attribute in the entire trace. High cardinality when the reader is an agent is more valuable, not less. And we have been pruning the parts of telemetry that are the most useful for the new reader in service to the old one. Span names have become an API, and everyone here in this room directionally has shipped an API before. With some of you, I've used some of those APIs, and I want to have a conversation later in the parking lot, but that's neither here. So you should ideally know the rules. Don't rename fields. Don't change types. Version everything. Add fields, don't remove them. Reviewers exist to enforce this. That contract is something you don't get to violate unless you're Google and it's any random Thursday. You have probably not thought of your span attributes this way. I'm hoping that after this talk you will. Here's what one of Billy's spans actually looks like. This is real, pulled from, again, yesterday. When a human reads this trace, the attribute names are just descriptions. They explain in passing what the service is doing. When an LLM reads this trace, the attribute names are the API. Classification.tier, classification.confidence, fastpath hit, billy.shadow mode, those aren't telemetry. Those are the interface that an agent is using to reason about what this service is doing and why it's doing it. If I rename fastpath hit to fastpath taken, every prompt anywhere in my system, soup to nuts, that mentions fastpath hit now silently disagrees with reality. The trace says one thing and the documentation says another, and there's no compiler that's going to catch that because it just thinks these are strings in a JSON blob. Span names and attribute names have become a public API with consumers, and these particular consumers are not patient when you ship breaking changes. Here's the rule. Print it out, put it on a sticker, and put it on Steven's monitor, because Steven's the engineer on your team who keeps renaming user ID to user underscore ID to user.id because they read a blog post about naming conventions. If they do it again after you have that conversation, put the sticker again on their goddamn screen so they can't do more damage. If you wouldn't ship a rename to your public API without a changelog, don't do it to your traces. Span names and attribute names are a contract. They are not log lines that you get to rephrase when you want. They're not internal variable names you can rename in a refactor PR. They are the API your agent and telemetry read. Version them, review them, stabilize them, and when you do change them, write a changelog, because the agent reading them is not your patient senior engineer who can figure it out from context. The agent is instead going to be very confidently wrong. Last year, in an uncharacteristic fit of professionalism, I wrote a runbook, a whole document. If Billy is down, do this. If Snarknado is publishing duplicates. If Dunkbot 8000, which was Dunkbot 9000's predecessor, is returning errors, here are the 3 most common causes. And it was a beautiful runbook, and I'm proud of it, and I don't think I or anyone else has ever read it when things weren't working. But what does get opened during an actual outage is the trace, every time. The runbook was a document that I wrote for a future human in prose, and also a bit of limerick, but that's beside the point. The traces are a structured account of what's happening written in real time for whatever reader shows up. The runbook lost. The runbook will continue to lose. If you're still writing detailed runbooks, I am not telling you to stop. But I am saying that the runbook is no longer the primary documentation. Your trace structure is. And if your trace structure is bad, no amount of runbook is going to save you from that, because nobody's reading the runbook anyway. Things are going away. Runbooks, wikis, most of what was in your README. None of them are dead. They're going to continue to exist. They're going to continue to be written. Junior engineers will continue to be told that they're important. Junior engineers will continue to be lied to. But the actual documentation of how your system operates, the thing that gets opened when the system is misbehaving and somebody or something needs to understand it fast, is now the trace structure. Treat it like the documentation that it is. Name things on purpose, which is the exact opposite of everything Amazon does. Be consistent and add new attributes the way you'd add new fields to a schema you publish externally, because the consumer reading those fields cannot ask you a clarifying question. Back to the 3 pillars story, we're left with traces. and the two things that my agents never look at. Let's talk about why. Metrics are an agentic dead end. A graph saying that errors went up at 3 p.m. is incredibly useful information for a human. You look at it and you go, errors started spiking at 3 p.m. I wonder what the hell Steven was doing then. Let's go check what was deployed, and you can go and check that. For an agent, the same graph is the end of the trail because it's an aggregate. The shape of the data that the agent could have followed has been crushed flat into a count, and it can't drill from the metric to the span because the metric doesn't remember what span contributed to it. The path that led there was mathematically destroyed. A metric is a beautiful summary of a story the agent kind of needs to be able to read in full. I'm not telling you to delete your metrics because people have rent to make. Metrics are going to continue to page you, which is useful. They will continue to act as ballast in your AWS and other bills. They will continue to anchor SLOs, which are also useful. But they are no longer the first place your agent is going to look. They're the thing the agent goes to when it needs to confirm that what it found in the traces matches a number you've already committed to somewhere else. Metrics are a fallback now. They are no longer the front door. And logs, of course, are a free text confessional optimized for the moment a human gave up trying to find structure and also finding meaning in their lives. Logs are the things you write when you're giving up. You have a span, the span has attributes, but you also want to point this one weird thing out in human prose in case someone needs to see it later. So you do. And where does it go? Into a log file. And 6 months later, when you need to grep across all your services for this one weird thing, the cardinality of free text logs is so absolutely catastrophic, you may as well be searching a library. Structured spans already have everything that logs were meant to surface. The attributes on a span are doing the job that log fields used to do, except they are typed, queryable, and ready for this? A known schema instead of a surprise emergent one. I have not opened a log dashboard in 3 weeks. Now, I want to be clear about what I am and what I'm not saying. It's easy to be misquoted here. Logs and metrics are not bad. They have been demoted. And technology didn't change so much as the reader changed. So that is a different form of technology. And when the reader changes, the relative usefulness of every tool in your stack shifts. If you, too, have not looked at your logs dashboard in 3 weeks either, and you've been quietly feeling guilty about it, I am giving you permission. You are not lazy. You're early. This is what happens, by the way, at every technology transition. Cassette tapes didn't stop existing the day the CD shipped. They got demoted. Some people kept using them and became pretentious about it. They weren't wrong to do this, but the dominant flow of information had dramatically shifted. Now, I spent most of this talk telling you the reader has changed, but now I want to tell you what that means going forward. This is the new equilibrium. The couch is on fire, Billy is asleep on it, I am in a bathrobe with a coffee watching the sun come up, and everything, as the slide says, is fine. This is not a victory lap. This is what stepping back looks like when you can do that. Because I used to be the one watching the couch, and then I stopped because an agent took over. Sometimes the agent also takes a nap. That's called the Anthropic Availability Window combined with GitHub. There's a book about this called The 4-Hour Work Week, but that's on kind. Great. Sometimes the couch also catches fire when everyone nominally responsible for the couch is somewhere else entirely. The system keeps going because the trace structure the agent is consuming is doing the work that I used to do, and honestly, most of the time, that's enough. I am not telling you that AI is the future. I do not know if AI is the future. What I know is what is happening right now, and that is the human is no longer the primary reader of your telemetry, and that change has consequences. One of them is on the slide behind me. 2 decades. We have spent 2 decades teaching humans to observe systems, give or take. We built tooling, we wrote books, we ran conferences, this conference, to make people good at this. And then, in a span of about 18 months, a second class of readers showed up. It did not ask permission, it did not RSVP, it wrote a disturbing percentage of people's talks, but it's good technology because they lie about using it. It started reading the telemetry we'd set up for ourselves, and it found the parts that were designed for human eyes to be basically illegible, and the parts that were structured and queryable, basically essential. We didn't redesign anything for it, though. We're still in the middle of figuring out that we have to. So this is the line I want you to take home from this. The next 20 years are not about prettier dashboards. They are not about better visualizations or heat maps that move on hover or service maps that will auto-arrange or any of the human affordance work that has been the primary axis of competition in this industry for the last decade. The next 20 years are going to be about what your trace structure says to a non-human reader at 3 a.m. when you are asleep and the agent is the only thing between you and an outage your customers will tell you about on Monday at tremendous volume. Build for that reader, document for that reader, and version your spans for that reader. Treat your cardinality budget as an investment in that reader's ability to follow the thread. Because the human reader that we all built this for is increasingly not the one in the chair. I'm Corey Quinn, and I want to thank Martin, Britt, Wendy, Jess, and Ken over at Honeycomb, and to Charity, whose entire aesthetic this deck has spent 30 minutes plagiarizing, or as I would frame it, improving. I don't use Honeycomb anymore because my AI does. Try not to take it personally. To follow my continuing antics, please visit shitposting.ai. Thank you for listening to my ridiculous nonsense.